Hello and welcome to BQ Prime. A very good morning to all the viewers. And picking up from the trade setup with Neeraj, one stock that is in focus, as we mentioned, was a Wipro. Overall, Wipro has announced a reorganization of its service offerings into four global business lines. And what they are and what they would mean for the company from a business perspective. Joining us on the show to discuss the same is Mahantesh Sabarad. Mahantesh, good morning and welcome to the show.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for having me on the show.
Always a pleasure. Mandesh, my first question coming to you is before we go in terms of what the stock has done and what this is, what does this entire restructuring or reorganizing under four global business lines mean? Because we are clearly talking about one, which is cloud, two is enterprise technology and business transformation, three is engineering, and four is going to be Wipro consulting, right? And which will align with Capco designate as well. Now, taking this entire restructuring into consideration, it's pretty much what they had done earlier as well in 2020 when Wipro actually replaced their original structure of seven strategic business unit service lines and nine geographies with four strategic market units and two global business lines.
So, the whole background to this restructuring that Wipro is undergoing has to do with the acquisitions they've done in the past few years. In the past 3 odd years, if I'm right, they've done close to $3 billion of acquisitions, Capco being one of the largest acquisition of all those. These acquisitions have meant to Wipro a big deal simply because they've opened up a large clientele, particularly in Europe. Capco being London headquartered, opened up a big client pool for them. So restructuring now that they have announced into four global business lines seems to be a natural fallout of the ongoing process they have to integrate these acquisitions into Wipro. To me, it doesn't surprise me that this restructuring has happened. In a way, these business lines were in existence. Okay, to be fair, these business lines were in existence. It's just that they have consolidated them and put proper ownership and proper senior personnel to deal with each of these business lines. So this restructuring seems to be just a natural fallout of the process they're going through in terms of integration of the acquisitions.
Right. So, do you think with this kind of a restructuring, it will mean sharper focus for a Wipro?
It potentially can, because all businesses, all companies would like to be aligned to what the market conditions are, what the market environment is. Remember, these are service companies; these are not product companies, right? So,
Mm,
unlike product companies who also have to align themselves to the products that they are putting out, service companies largely have to do with aligning themselves to client needs and the environment in which they are operating. So having said that, it doesn't really surprise me that this is happening. Probably the timing is something one could have not predicted, that potentially this should have happened a bit earlier, let's say,
mm.
for argument's sake. Otherwise, organizing yourself into four business lines when the business lines, in a way, really existed. So what I said was that the business lines already existed. It's just that they have
Right.
given proper ownership to it. They've brought in the right senior management responsibility attached to those business lines.
Mm. Right. So overall, with this in place, and if you talk about the acquisitions they've made as well over the last 2.5 years, we've seen a considerable growth that has come in terms of size for a Wipro through the inorganic route. But has that actually translated from a business perspective for the company?
If you trace the history of the revenue growth that Wipro has posted over the last 3 years, then it's only been 1 year where they had a blockbuster year in terms of revenue growth of 28% the year before last, if I'm right. Thereafter, the growth rate has kind of petered out and has come suboptimal. In fact, this year, which is this fiscal year, they will end with um, they've given a guidance of somewhere between 10 to 12% top line growth. Now, compared to an Infi, whose guidance is somewhere around 16%, or let's say HCL Tech, whose guidance is around 14%, this is a suboptimal for Wipro. So it appears, therefore, that all those inorganic acquisitions have not led to any sustained growth for Wipro as yet. Although the management always talks about saying that in the last 10 quarters, we have grown 45%. Um, that's fine. That means your average quarterly growth is upwards of 4%, but that's still not doesn't translate into a large growth. You should have an annual growth upwards of 16%, 17% if that is
Mm.
the case. But that's not the what the guidance is now.
Right. So overall, if you see in terms of the various, the four business lines that they're talking about, where do you see they will be able to actually achieve the growth that we should be watching out for?
It's very difficult to say because while the most promising of these business lines appears to be the cloud business line, but that is where the major headwinds are now coming globally, because most of the globe's concern has to do with recession, and recession will mean that I, IT spendings will be a lot lesser. Cloud will be something which will be put on the back burner by most of the companies. But if one has to be a really realistic about the growth ahead, what is it that will really click for Wipro in terms of all these business lines? I think consulting is the one where they can potentially do better.
Right. So overall, I mean, as you mentioned, in terms of crowd as well, it almost makes up for more than one third of the company's revenues. And if that's where there is difficulty from an industry perspective, that's something we should be watching out for. Overall, from a performance perspective, I mean, Wipro as a stock, Mantesh, has been an underperformer as compared to its peers, right? Uh, do you think a news like this warrants for a positive, move in terms of the stock perspective, if you have to look at valuations as well?
So the fact that the stock has underperformed and is at pretty low levels, when I say low levels, it's simply from a stock price perspective. And when you have such a news coming in, obviously there will be a positive response that typically accompanies um, such a news. So I wouldn't say that this positive development will continue for a long time, because the basic concern still remains, which is that where is that acceleration of growth going to come from? Because investors haven't seen any acceleration in growth. 12% if is what the year's growth gonna be for FY 23. Is FY 24 going to be likely higher? This is where investors will have been digging deeper about Wipro, and somewhere the suspicion of most followers of Wipro stock has been that the deal wins, deal sizes that they've been announcing, the TCV value of deals that they've been announcing is somewhere a bit suspect in
Mm.
terms of the potential revenue potential that they've been having. So to answer your question, what will happen today in terms of the stock price? Probably it's a positive news. Investors will look at it positive, but how positively? That's a question I cannot answer, and how long also is something that needs to be um, looked at. I'm not too sure about what will
Right.
happen in longer duration.
Right. One more question I have, Mahantesh, is you've been tracking the industry for quite some time. Overall, have we seen this kind of realignment in other IT firms in the past? And if yes, what has it actually led to?
I think that is pretty common in terms of restructuring business line alignments and so on and so forth, because you would have noticed that over the years, over the past decades, there's been a big transformation that has happened in terms of IT revenues, IT service revenues that these top rung IT companies have been doing. Cloud was not there, really speaking, say 5 years ago, right? And that's suddenly becoming a big piece of many of these companies. Years ago, no, I'll really go back into history when
mm,
enterprise software came in. That was a big thing for most of the IT services companies.
mm,
So IT is a field, information technology is a field which keeps transforming itself, keeps changing itself at a very rapid pace. And I have seen most of the companies go through this business line alignments all the time. So it's not really surprising.
Hmm. Right. And another question I had for you is, I mean, Capco is one of the largest, it's a large scale acquisition as well for a Wipro. Do you think there could be possibilities of integration issues that could crop in, taking into consideration the way the performance has been so far?
That's what been the primary concern, no, when I outlined
Mm,
at the start by
mm,
saying that the underperformance of Wipro relative to the other companies is because the integration is being questioned, the growth rate is not being seen, accelerated growth rate is not being seen. The only good thing that has been seen is a bit of margin improvement. But coming to the question of Capco integrating with Wipro, let's be clear about one thing. Capco was a altogether different business line for Wipro. Right? They were not really into consulting in a big way, and Capco has opened up that field for them. That opportunity has come to them. Uh, so there's no question of integration, therefore, per se, a priori coming in. At the outset, there was, like I'm saying, that the outset there was virtually no consulting, and they've not got now got a consulting business under their wing. So there shouldn't be any integration issue. Uh, it is Capco is being in a way within Wipro run separately thus far. With this announcement of global business line, what happens is that some of the business segments which were outside Capco will get into the Capco business line, the
mm.
consulting business line to be uh, sure.
Right.
I don't see much of an integration issue, at least at that end.
Right. So currently, my last question coming to you is from a valuation perspective, where do you place a Wipro as compared to the peers? And what's your view on the stock?
That's a very difficult question. See, when you look at the classical comparison with the large IT companies, Wipro is a low growth company. Wipro is a low margin company. Wipro is not a company that has got great capabilities in any particular field. Each of their business lines are really weak.
Hmm.
So Wipro, therefore, unlike in the past, has been valued very feebly by the markets. In fact, this year's underperformance, there's a almost 30% drop in Wipro's price in the past 1 year, if I'm right.
Right.
And most of the IT companies have corrected, but the index is not corrected that sharply. What has happened is that the expectations around Wipro have hugely moderated, bringing it into a valuation zone which is fairly attractive. And if the delivery henceforth, if what the management talks about in saying that we have got a huge backlog of orders to be fulfilled and therefore growth rate will be better ahead, whenever they've been asked about the TCVs, the growth in the
Hmm.
TCV and the corresponding growth in the actual revenue numbers, they've always been talking about, wait, we have a huge backlog. So if that is what is upcoming in terms of the backlog flowing into revenues and with the cash conversion cycle being pretty strong,
Hmm.
uh, I would tend to believe that most of the market participants will start looking at Wipro and positively and start perhaps adding it to their portfolios.
Right. So overall, I think it is going to be still a wait and watch mode whether this restructuring actually helps the company from an execution perspective and gets them into a delivery mode as well, which actually translates the deal wins into revenues is something is a wait and watch for everyone as well. But thank you, Mahantesh, so much for speaking to us at PQ Prime and giving us that bit of knowledge in terms of what it would mean in terms of the restructuring that Wipro has undertaken. Thank you. Stay safe and speak to you soon again.
Thank you, Hiral. Thank you for having me on this show.